And as we continue to cope with COVID, we have Dr. Keith Nurse on the line. Dr. Nurse is the principal president of the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College in St. Lucia. He served as the WTO chair at the University of the West Indies, as senior economist and advisor on structural policies and innovation to the OECD Development Center in Paris. He's on the executive bureau of the UN Committee for Development Policy, a subsidiary body of the United Nations Economic and Social Council. He also serves now as a member of the Hemispheric Program Advisory Committee of the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation in Agriculture. And Dr. Nurse was a former member of the Economic Development Advisory Board, the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. So it is my pleasure to continue this conversation with him. We started it about 2 weeks ago, and we're just keeping it up every week because every day things are changing. So good morning, Dr. Keith Nurse.
Good morning to you, Lisa. How are you?
I am in good spirits so far, and I just want to continue that way because I do know that we are going through, and we expect to go through even more turbulent times, but I want to be optimistic and think of a silver lining. But what do you say in terms of the economic impact that all of this is going to have?
Well, as we've been saying,
for the
these are
Caribbean,
unprecedented
especially
times.
for the Caribbean.
For the Caribbean and for the world. What's unusual is that all the economies on the planet are being impacted in a negative way all at the same time. So this is quite unusual, very much unprecedented. And so almost all economies are facing a significant downturn in activity, as well as what we call an external shock or demand shock, particularly for the Caribbean in tourism dependent economies. So they're going to be the hardest hit because we don't know when tourism is going to rebound. We're talking about stayover travel, as well as cruise ship travel, and even intra-regional travel. When will that come back? We're not quite sure.
And Keith, I think the U.S. president is probably thinking about, or probably anxious, or has some level of anxiety about all of this, because there's talk of, of him saying it's time to open up, at least in some states. What do you think about that approach coming out of the U.S.?
Well, all the data and the historical experience, particularly from the Spanish flu, tells us that if you open up too early and you have a second and a third wave of infections, it deteriorates the economic bounce back.
Yes.
And so if you go prematurely, you actually deteriorate the economic possibilities in the future. And so that is something that needs to be taken into account. I noticed yesterday that the United States government has decided to bail out the airlines. In part, that's somewhat good for us, and we're hoping that they can bounce back quickly. But will the passengers come back? If there's any fear of reinfections or infections going through airports, airlines, etc., then the tourism won't come back until sometime in 2021. And that's going to be a huge factor for the region, with countries depending on tourism, so 40 to 60% of their GDP in some of the territories in the region.
Or it may take a different form, a virtual form of tourism, perhaps, Keith?
Yeah, but all of our critical infrastructure is premised on physical travel. And that's where we generate and are able to monetize tourism. And so what do you do with the workers? Are they trained for this alternative type of tourism? And the answer is invariably no. And so we're not well prepared for providing alternative forms of tourism. So for example, educational tourism is something that we need to push more on because that's more durable. It doesn't rely on an individual traveler. It actually depends on a whole package of offers that students can bring. And one foreign student is equivalent to about 10 traditional tourists.
Yes.
And so it has a bigger impact on the economy.
Well, some of the Caribbean islands have already started diversifying the types of tourism, away from the traditional sun, sea, into sport tourism, health tourism. For example, I think Suriname at one point was looking at that. Grenada, of course, with the university there. What can you give us an update? And I know you were doing some research in that area at one time.
Yeah. Well, I've done lots of work on different kinds of tourism. So, for example, the work that, in fact, we were both involved in was looking at diaspora tourism. So, for example, diaspora tourism is something that's probably going to bounce back first for the Caribbean because our kith and kin who weren't able to reach in before the border was closed, they would love to come back to the Caribbean as soon as possible. Now, in some territories, like in Guyana and Suriname, that's 70% of their arrivals. Or in Jamaica, that's 30%. Dominican Republic, similarly. For Trinidad and Tobago, is a little bit less. But you could see it's a huge element of our tourism package and policy opportunities. But for many of the other traditional areas, we probably won't see a significant bounce back for most of this year. And so that means that for economies that are very much dependent on tourism, then we're talking about a very long time before they are able to recover, which has a huge impact on the domestic economy.
Yes. We started to talk about Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica last week because both territories, well, Jamaica to a lesser extent, but Trinidad and Tobago certainly impacted by the price of oil and what that means in terms of the future coming out of COVID-19, the whole pandemic situation for Trinidad and Tobago economically.
Yeah, well, Trinidad is faced with a demand shock, meaning that the demand for oil and gas has declined with the slowdown in the global economy almost everywhere. So there's less demand for the products that we produce and export. But Trinidad and Tobago is in a more favorable position than its neighbors because at least we have a product that is still in demand. In the other territories, with the tourism-based economies, they have no demand. So Trinidad, what Trinidad has to do is manage and conserve its foreign exchange by reducing its food import bill, by reducing its need for other imported products, and do a lot of import replacement. So this really provides us with an opportunity to use the crisis as the basis for economic diversification and generate new small businesses in key areas, particularly in the health-related areas, in food, in generating new forms of green energy, for example, is another area that we could really move on.
Keith, let's pivot a little bit. You are the principal and president of the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College there in St. Lucia. How do we reframe the educational experience in a lockdown and at this time?
Oh, yeah. Well, we've been forced to rapidly scale up our online training platforms. And in fact, I think we've done remarkably well. We're now in a position where over 80% of our students are now online. Over 95% of our staff is already online and teaching. And if I recall correctly, over 85% of our courses are now actively online and being delivered on new platforms. We've also been doing a lot of webinars for our lecturers, which is being taken up by teachers and other lecturers from other territories. In fact, we've had over 11,000 visits in the last week for webinars, and that's just not from our staff alone. So we're providing services to a wider group of trainers all across the region. What it does showing up though is that some of our teachers at primary and secondary school levels don't have even the devices at home. What we've been able to benefit from the Digicel and Flow is they've zero-rated our website for our training. And so people are able to test the website without having to pay for data. So those are some of the benefits that we've gained through the crisis, collaborating with the telecoms operators.
So what are some of the lessons and insights we can garner from everything that's happening right now, Keith? What are the takeaways?
Well, the biggest takeaway is that we need to reduce our economic dependence generally across the Caribbean. If you look at our import bill for food, energy, pharmaceuticals, manufactured goods, and so on, some of which we can do some import replacement for, we need to focus on that. The other area is that, as you could see with the impact of COVID-19 on some of the major cities in the United States, populations with high chronic non-communicable diseases are being severely affected by COVID. And in the region, CNCDs, as they call, is a major impact. Has a major impact on our domestic economy already. A large share of our population has diabetes, hypertension, and so on. And so those populations are very much vulnerable to COVID. It means then that we need a strong preventative health framework. We need to really invest more in public health and wellness to change that scenario. And so that's a whole industry in itself that we could, you know, and kudos to you guys on your show, you know, doing exercise.
Oh, you watched the show then?
Yeah, and you know, cooking. How do we cook more indigenous foods that are healthier than the imported processed foods, etc., etc. Those are all things that we can do. They're all within our grasp, actually.
Yeah. Well, Keith, we just have 1 minute. How do we break out of this crisis of uncertainty? I know we're going to be continuing next week, Wednesday, but any ideas as to how we can break out of this crisis of uncertainty where people have this anxiety about the future?
Yeah. I mean, the big thing is to focus on creating a plan. So planning actually helps you to figure out, well, what are my options? So we need to be identifying where are the key areas of vulnerability. And the biggest vulnerability for Trinidad as the COVID scenario runs on is that how do we ensure that the vulnerable populations and the working class populations are able to have enough income to buy food or have some access to food and other forms of sustenance. And so that becomes the most vulnerable and critical area. And so we need to plan better for those communities. You can see all around the world, people are creating delivery systems, but testing then becomes another critical factor that we need to do to ensure that we are COVID-free and are able to advertise that we are COVID-free in the next coming months.
All right, Keith. Dr. Keith Nurse, we're going to have to leave it there, but we'll join you again next week, Wednesday, as we continue to talk about the issues impacting the economy as we cope with COVID here on the Now Morning Show. Thank you so much, Keith Nurse, Dr. Keith Nurse across there in St. Lucia. Keith, always very interesting speaking with Keith Nurse Carey.
And his wealth of knowledge.
Yeah, and, listen to me. Just is so broad-ranging, you know. Yeah. So we're going to be talking with him for a while.
We have for quite a while.
I like to say he's my Dr. Sanjay Gupta, who never leaves CNN at all. He's on all day, right? Okay, speaking about CNN, we're going to kick it upstairs to our news center, where Ria is on standby with the news to the top of the hour.